So Pokemon Day is just 20 days away from the time that I upload this video, and we're all anticipating the announcement of that Pokemon Presents, which is finally going to show us the brand new Pokemon games that are going to be coming out this year. But what if I told you that we actually might know exactly what every single Pokemon game is going to be for potentially the next 6 years? And what makes this really exciting is that this information isn't coming from some insider or a random post on a forum, but the actual Pokemon Company and GameFreak themselves, as by now I'm sure you guys are aware of the massive hack that happened to GameFreak a while ago, where hackers were able to steal like a terabyte of confidential documents and information from GameFreak, which ended up leaking a lot of information about their future projects, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at inside of this video. And so there could very well be spoilers here for the entire Pokemon game library on the Nintendo Switch 2 and really all the Pokemon games for the next 5 or so years. So if you don't want to know this information and you do want to get truly surprised when Game Freak and the Pokemon Company unveil these games for the first time, then click off this video because we are going to be looking at all of these leaked documents and all the information that it's talking about with these projects. Alright, so starting off with 2026, I think by now most people already kind of have an idea of what to expect for the brand new Pokemon games for this year, and these are of course going to be the Pokemon games that get announced in that Pokemon Presents, which will happen for Pokemon Day at the end of this month. And what we're all expecting this year is of course the brand new Generation 10 Pokemon games, and these games were leaked inside of that massive hack that happened with Game Freak, and so the Generation 10 Pokemon games are going to be Pokemon Winds and Pokemon Waves. And so these are going to be the very big Gen 10 games that are coming out for this year, and we will see them get revealed at the end of the month on Pokemon Day. And really, when it comes to these games, we already have a ton of information about them because a lot of information about them was inside of the leaks when it came out with the Game Freak hack. And so I actually made an entire video going over all the information that we have because we have details on what the region is going to be like, what some of the characters could be like, even some of the gameplay mechanics. So it is pretty cool, and these games are looking to be some of the most ambitious games that Game Freak has made, and I guess it does make sense because this is going to be the very big and important Generation X for them, and it is also here to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Pokemon, so they should really lock in when it comes to these games, and we do have a lot of information about it. So if you are interested in what to expect for the Pokemon games for this year, you can definitely click or tap on that eye up in the corner right now if you want to go and watch that video, but I'll also have it in the outro of this video if you want to go and watch it after you're done watching this one. Now going into next year with 2027, I feel like this should also be pretty easy to kind of figure out what we can expect from Pokemon next year, because ever since we moved to the Nintendo Switch and have started getting brand new generations of Pokemon on there, what have we always gotten the following year after a brand new generation? It is of course DLC for that new generation, and it seems like there was a little bit of information already mentioning that inside of these leaked Game Freak documents, but yeah, we are going to be getting Pokemon Winds and Waves DLC, and that seems like it's going to be like the main Pokemon content for 2027. We don't have any actual details on like what the DLC is going to be like or their approach to it, but I do feel like it might be a little bit different because it seems like internally Game Freak has been kind of reorganizing how they're doing DLC, and really they're going to have like a different approach to it moving forward. And it seems like Mega Dimension with like Pokemon Legends ZA was already kind of our first look at that, and really the whole reason for all of this is because of the DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet with the teal mask and the indigo disc. It actually ended up becoming super expensive for them to develop, where that DLC alone was just as expensive as the entirety of Pokemon Legends Arceus. And then a lot of people didn't actually buy the DLC either, so it seems like they were just kind of like restructuring how they're going to go about DLC moving forward. So we'll have to see how exactly they're going to do the DLC for Gen 10, because I don't know if it's going to be like what they did with Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet, where they have like 2 massive packs that come out at different points in the year. So that is going to be pretty interesting to see. But now moving into 2028, here is where it's getting a little bit more exciting because they've got another project here called Project Ringo, which essentially seems like it's going to be the 3rd Pokemon Legends game. And it says here that this game is going to be focused on AI plus physics-based simulations when it comes to the game on like a mechanical level. And it says here that this game is going to be set 1,000 years in the past Galar region when Pokeballs do not exist. So this is really interesting because it says here humans and Pokemon will coexist directly, but players are going to rely on Pokemon that they encounter locally, forming groups and flocks rather than having structured teams. And I'm going to show you guys exactly what that kind of means in a second, but it says here that Pokemon will move, react, and fight together using advanced AI behaviors, and this is going to be designed to support battles against giant Dynamax Pokemon, which are like natural forces instead of standard boss fights. So it seems like that the third Legends game for Pokemon could actually be something with the Galar region and Pokemon Sword and Shield, and it seems like that this could be what they're aiming for with 2028. And we've got an actual image here of like some of the images that got leaked too, and you can kind of see here what they were kind of going for with this game, and you can see exactly how big this Colossal looks here, and this seems to be like what they really want the kind of vision of this game to be like, where you're taking down these giant like Dynamax Pokemon, and they're going to be like kind of like these really crazy fights that you're going to have with these long health bars. And even just kind of looking at the UI, you can see that this looks much more like a traditional kind of, I guess, like Pokemon Legends Arceus style compared to like what Pokemon Legends ZA was, where like this you can see here in like the bottom right corner, you have like the 3 Pokemon like how it was in like Pokemon Legends Arceus, where you press L and R to kind of go through them, you can press X to like switch between your Pokemon and your Pokeballs, and it seems like it's very kind of similar to Pokemon Legends Arceus compared to like Legends ZA, where you were using like the D-pad to send out Pokemon and stuff like that. There's a model of Irida here, which is just a placeholder model, I'm sure, but you can kind of get the idea for what they want this game to look like. And something that also really excites me is that they had this image inside of their leaked documents where they were actually talking about how they want this Pokemon Legends game in Galar to be heavily inspired off of Xenoblade Chronicles X. And you guys probably know I'm a huge Xenoblade fan, so Xenoblade X is really cool because that is one of those games where like you can walk around in the world and there's like these gigantic like dinosaurs and like huge monsters that are just towering above you, and the scale and vision of that game is just something incredible. So if they really want to kind of have inspiration off of that and want to make a Pokemon Legends game like that, I think that there could be a lot of insane potential, and it would be something really cool to see. Here's a slide that kind of explains more about what they meant with having like flocks of Pokemon and groups of Pokemon with you instead of a structured team. So you can see in that image that Irida has a Magnemite, a couple of Starlies, a couple of Bidoofs, a Clefairy, an Azumarill, a Pikachu, a Mr. Mime, and a Gardevoir. So that's much more than the typical 6 Pokemon that you can carry with you. And this seems to be kind of like the gameplay concept that they want with this Legends game, where you can actually just have groups of Pokemon that are going to be with you, and they're all going to have like their own AI and physics, and they're going to be helping you out with like the boss battles and having battles against Pokemon. So it does seem like a pretty interesting approach. And then we've got some more information here too, where it says the exploration takes place across the vast untouched landscapes of ancient Galar, shaped entirely by nature. So this seems like we're going to be going back to having like those zones like in Pokemon Legends Arceus, where you can actually explore, and it's not all going to be in just one area like how it was in Legends ZA with Lumio City. Survival and progression depend on how players use Pokemon abilities to navigate the terrain, interact with the environment, and protect early human settlements. Internally, the project is summarized as the concept of AI crossing over with physics. And then it says here that the Pokemon behavior and autonomous decision making are really going to be kind of a part of why they're kind of talking about that as like the internal concept. Also having group and swarm dynamics, and having a physics driven like movement and interactions with the Pokemon. And then also the large scale encounters that are going to be in the open environments. So it really seems like this is also kind of like a challenge that they want, I think, in terms of like developing, because it seems like they can really kind of like hone in on their skills with like AI and having the Pokemon react differently and how their behaviors are going to be. So it seems like it would be a challenge for them, while also having a really kind of cool Pokemon game for the players to play as well. So it does seem really interesting. And here's another slide with some more information. You can kind of see it's still a little loosely translated from the Japanese, but you can kind of get an idea for what it's trying to say. It says that this is a prototype for the third Legends game using Pokemon AI and physics. It's set in Galar 1,000 years ago, where there are no balls. I'm making a game where you gather Pokemon locally, create a flock, and battle against giant Dynamax Pokemon. So it kind of shows you what the catching would be like, and it's still similar from like Pokemon Legends Arceus. and then at the right you can kind of see like that image of like a human settlement with like humans and Slowbro all kind of gathering around together. So yeah, it seems like the idea for this Pokemon game is really cool, and we do have more information about it still as well, where it says here that the narrative objectives would involve the creation of the world's first Gigamax Pokeball. So I'm guessing the Gigamax Pokeball is like that kind of like disco ball looking Pokeball that you have when you catch like a Gigantamax or Dynamax Pokemon with the raids that are inside of Pokemon Sword and Shield. So maybe this is going to be like the first ever like Pokeball that's going to be created with that. And what's interesting is how they were also mentioning that this is before Pokeballs were even invented. So in Pokemon Legends Arceus, you already did have Pokeballs, but they were using like those apricorns and stuff, but maybe this is even further than that. So this could be like the very first Pokeball that was ever created, because it says here that leaked materials show early concepts of sealing stones, primitive containment tools, and handcrafted devices, potentially showing the origin of Pokemon capturing technology. So this could be like the whole entire like idea of just being able to even capture Pokemon so that you can have them for yourself, and like maybe this is going to be like leading to the creation of the very first Giga Max Pokeball, and that's going to be like that giant Pokeball that you first have, and maybe then as technology advances, that's how it shows you like how the Pokeballs can get smaller, and then they can become like those like really modern ones that you have where like they're the really small Pokeballs that then expand. So I feel like this could be a pretty interesting type of narrative idea and like approach to the story as well. And then it just says here that Project Ringo is still in the prototyping phase, and that it has not become a fully greenlit project. So what this means is that it's also possible that this might never happen, because this doesn't mean that it's 100% happening. This is just a prototype, and it's just a concept that somebody kind of talked about in terms of like what their vision is for another Pokemon Legends game. It's possible that they could move from this and they could do something else. I think there was even like somebody like who mentioned that they were essentially going to do an entire different generation with Pokemon Legends ZA before they ended up doing like the Kalos region. So I think it was supposed to be Johto, or it might have been some other region, but they weren't going to do Kalos originally. So it's possible that they could do something like that with this as well, where they're talking about Galar and then they end up doing like some other type of Pokemon Legends game or some other type of game instead. But at the moment, it seems like that this is something that they were kind of talking about, and it was in the prototyping phase for 2028. And I do feel like if it does happen, it seems like it would be pretty exciting. I definitely would be very excited to play this game, and it seems like it would be a lot of fun, but I guess we'll have to see if it does really end up happening. Oh, and here's just the last image that they had about this Pokemon Legends game, and you can just see here that it says, Ringo is a prototype project that is currently being developed as a candidate for the next Legends title, and features Pokemon AI and physics calculations. So with how they're really talking about like having AI and physics, it seems like they really want this game to be like a very kind of like intelligently kind of developed game, I guess, with like how the Pokemon behave, and maybe like the different physics simulations that they have, like with maybe how like that golem in that image could be like rolling around and how it's going to interact with like the different things in the environment and stuff. It seems like it would be a cool challenging game for them to develop, but it would also be really cool for us to play. And I really do love like the atmosphere that they have in these images. Like those images kind of remind me a little bit of Elden Ring, which is kind of how the colors look and the skies and everything. But yeah, it just seems like it would be a really fun Pokemon game if it does look like this, and I would definitely be very interested in playing it. But now moving into 2029, here is where it gets potentially really exciting. And I know it says Pokemon Seed right there, but I just want to let you know that it's not a Pokemon game called Pokemon Seed, but rather this is the internal like project code name that they have for a game right now. And because it doesn't have an actual name, it's just easier to refer to as Pokemon Seed, but that's not actually what the game is going to be called. So they have a project here called Project Seed, where it's actually going to be a Pokemon MMO. And so this is really exciting because an MMO is of course a massive multiplayer online game, and it says right here that this is envisioned as a next generation multi-region online Pokemon experience. And it says here that it's described to build a Pokemon version of Japan with a single massive map designed to be traversed seamlessly on foot. And it says here that it involves a fully interconnected world linking multiple regions from Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, Sinnoh, and Kitakami. And then it says here that the goal is to allow players to travel continuously from one region to another without loading barriers and fulfilling the long fan dream of a real multi-region Pokemon game. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I would always dream about having a Pokemon game with just all the regions put together. Like, I know that was definitely something that I would talk about all the time with my friends, is like, why can't they just make a game with like having Kanto and Johto and Hoenn and Sinnoh and everything put together, have like 32 gym battles and have all these crazy stuff? And as a kid, that seems like it would be amazing, but as you kind of get older and kind of start to realize how these games work, it starts to kind of not really as make much sense, because you'd be like, well, how would they balance a game like that? How would it really make sense? It would be really kind of weird. But if they don't do a mainline Pokemon game, but do something completely different where you have an MMO, that is something that could work, and this is sounding incredibly exciting. So here's the internal GameFreak slide that ended up leaking, and you can see right here that it says that they want to make a Pokemon map of Japan. We aim to create a map where you can walk from Sinnoh to Hoenn, and that image on the right really kind of gives you like the foundation of what they're trying to do, where you've got like the Hoenn region at the very left side, you've got Johto and Kanto in the middle put together, Kitakami at the top, and then Sinnoh above all of that. And so essentially you'd be able to like walk from Hoenn all the way into Johto, into Kanto, you'd be able to walk out of there into Kitakami and walk all the way up to Sinnoh without having any loading screens or anything like that. So of course that does sound extremely exciting. And we do have some more information here too, where it says here that there is a huge emphasis on online multiplayer exploration. So they really want this game to be the type of game where you're playing this with your friends and doing stuff. And it says here that multiple players would coexist in the same world in real time, exploring, interacting, and sharing the environment within a persistent living Pokemon world. The experience is designed around freedom of movement plus discovery instead of linear progression. So you know how in like typical Pokemon games, it's very linear with like how you do this thing in this area, and then you move to the next route, you go to this next area, you do this next gym battle. This game would be like you have the full freedom to really just do whatever you want and tackle the missions and like quests and stuff at your own pace. So it'll be really cool. Like if you want to go to Hoenn, you go to Hoenn. If you want to go to Sinnoh, you go to Sinnoh. Like you really have the freedom to go wherever you want, whatever area you want to look for Pokemon and do stuff. So I think just having that aspect combined together with the multiplayer, it would be incredibly fun. And then it says here that the world dynamically reflects real weather conditions and seasonal changes impacting Pokemon encounters. So that kind of reminds me of like Pokemon Black and White, where it had like seasons and you'd be able to find different Pokemon and find different items and stuff depending on what time of the year that you played the game. So that was really cool. And then it says here that it aims to make the environment feel alive and reactive, with different Pokemon appearing depending on the climate, location, and time of year. It says here that rather than being a traditional remake, Project Seed is positioned as a prototype for a future Pokemon online platform, and that this is the franchise's first real step towards an MMO-like structure, and that it combines large-scale exploration, social interaction, and shared progression across multiple regions into a single cohesive experience. So honestly, this wouldn't even be like just a normal Pokemon game. Like this is basically like Pokemon's equivalent of like Final Fantasy XIV, where it's basically like this giant game where so many people can just connect together and play with each other. You've got like, probably there would be like, I'm guessing different expansions that would come out for it. Like it would be like that long-term investment kind of end game type of Pokemon game where you can really just like play this forever if you want to, and just keep investing so many time, like so many hours really, and just a bunch of time into it. So this could be really, for some people, this might be like the perfect type of Pokemon game. But now going into 2030, this is of course 4 years after this year. And if you think about it, Pokemon has now been seemingly moving to having generations every 4 years, as Generation 9 with Pokemon Scarlet and Violet was in 2022. In 2026, we're going to be getting Gen 10 this year. So of course, 4 more years later, that is going to be Generation 11 for the Nintendo Switch 2. So this is going to be in 2030, and I've got Pokemon Plus and Minus here. These are not like leaked names or anything, they're just concept names because I can't think of anything else for Gen 11 at the moment, but you get the idea. This would basically just be like a brand new generation of Pokemon, still for the Nintendo Switch 2 and coming out in 2030. And there is a Game Freak slide about it here. There's not really any information because I don't think that they've really developed anything much for it, but it just says here that we are currently developing Gaia, which is Gen 10, and next we're also working towards developing a numbered title to be released in 2030. We will also be working on the Generation 11 prototype, and we will be creating a combined team of the R&D department and the concept and visual studio, which will be launched this year. Here too, main members will be working part-time as a part of the team, so we appreciate your cooperation. So it doesn't really say anything, it just says Project 2030 essentially, because that's when they're planning to have this game come out, and I think that it makes a lot of sense. We don't really have too much information about it because they're really kind of still working on Gen 10 right now and the DLC and stuff, I'm sure, so they don't really think as much about it, but that's pretty much when we can expect Gen 11 to come out. And then following that, I think we can also kind of get an idea. This wasn't inside of the leaks, but I think just kind of using common sense, we can kind of figure out that if Gen 11 is coming in 2030, then the following year would be Gen 11 DLC. And really after 2031, we're probably going to be starting to think about what the next Nintendo system is going to be, which is really crazy because this would be like, at this time now, like 2031, the Nintendo Switch 2 would be like 6 years old at this point. And like at that point, like I'm sure like with this generation, maybe they'd have like another game following that, like a Pokemon Legends game or something like that, but that would probably be the last Pokemon game for the Nintendo Switch 2 before whatever next system Nintendo plans on comes out. And I know that's like thinking way too far into the future. I don't know if it would be like a Nintendo Switch 3 or if it would be something else, but you kind of get the idea that this is really kind of the entire like timeline that they already have now in terms of the projects that they're working on with the Nintendo Switch 2. And just as we're wrapping up here, I do want to mention that it is of course possible that these types of projects might not all go all the way into becoming actual games that we can play. There's a lot of times that stuff can get scrapped behind the scenes or it gets changed into something else, so it doesn't mean that this is exactly what's going to happen. Really the only things here that I feel like are guaranteed are of course going to be that Pokemon Gen 10 is coming out this year and Gen 11 is probably going to be in 2030, but when it comes to like that Pokemon MMO game or Pokemon Legends in like the Galar region, it's possible that those games could come out. It's possible they could change into something else, and we've already even seen before, like there was supposed to be like a Pokemon game called, I think, Pokemon Synapse, where it was going to be like this game where I think it was going to have like shooter elements and you were going to be able to ride on Pokemon. We even have a little bit of like leaked gameplay about it, which I'll have on your screen right now, and that was a game that got completely scrapped. Like it never came out, we're never going to see it, so it's always possible for stuff like that to happen. So it doesn't mean that exactly all of this stuff is going to happen for sure, so we never really know for sure, but I think that this does give us kind of an idea of the stuff that they're planning and maybe what the future could be like when it comes to Pokemon games on the Switch 2. Now, all of these Pokemon projects are pretty cool, but I'm sure that there's still one thing that a lot of you guys are wondering about, and that is the remakes for Pokemon Black and White. As for the longest time, whenever we got Pokemon games, sometimes after a new generation, we would also get a remake for an older generation while we were waiting for the next brand new generation to come out, and so we've had like Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and most recently, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. So the next Pokemon games that are in line to get a remake is of course the 5th generation with Pokemon Black and White. And so a lot of people have been wondering like what's going on with those remakes, because if this is supposedly Game Freak's entire timeline and plan for what they're going to be doing with the Nintendo Switch 2, we don't have anything with the Gen 5 remakes that's in here, so it really does kind of make you wonder what's going on, and we actually don't have any information, but the only thing that we have is from one of the Game Freak documents. We have this quote right here where it actually says, "Remakes made for Black and White onwards should have a lot more love and care put into them. I hope that they become good games that will allow people to enjoy eras different from the Legend series." And so I think that this kind of sounds like that they were kind of more aware of like how people didn't really like Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. So I think that they're trying to say like with Black and White and the other remakes that we do, like make sure that there's a lot more love and care that's put into them so that people do like them. But we actually don't have anything from Game Freak right now in terms of their leaked plans that's talking about a Unova remake or Gen 5 remake. So then it makes you wonder, well, maybe they might be doing what they did with like Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, which is outsourcing it to another company, because it might not be in like Game Freak's plans to do anything with Black and White anymore, but they'll have another company do it so that we can still get a Gen 5 remake. But it is something interesting because I know a lot of people are wondering about that. I of course am wondering about it too, but it does seem like right now Game Freak is not working on anything with like a Gen 5 remake, or it's not planned at Game Freak, so I guess we'll have to wait and see what does end up happening with that. But yeah, if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely be sure to click that like button and also subscribe to the channel as well. I'm definitely gonna have some more videos talking about Pokemon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on that. Comment down below and let me know what you think about all of this. Do these future Pokemon projects make you excited? What are you looking forward to the most? Definitely be sure to comment down below and let me know. But if you don't have anything to say about it, just comment your favorite emoji down below for some engagement. I would really appreciate it. Go follow me on Twitter at Aero so you can be featured in videos, and also join my Discord server as well. We've got a bunch of people in there who are always talking about Pokemon and Smash Bros, so definitely be sure to join that. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching.